the House bonding proposal?
Where's the other half? We just saw it last night, but it's woefully inadequate. About $2.3 billion of real needs. That $1.5 billion, of which I could include in my budget, another 800 million plus that was requested for local projects that I didn't include, but many of those are most of those are meritorious. So I guess that's all I have to say at this point, until we have a chance to look at the details of it.
And tapping the Vikings Reserve Fund for the,
It's just, no, it's just not going to happen. They're not going to muck around there. I think Commissioner Franz wrote an excellent letter to Chairman Nabal yesterday. He detailed there are 5 different funds that they're rating to try to make up. We have a surplus, you know. We have a projected surplus. All they need to do is budget the money appropriately, not give it all away in tax cuts, and fund schools, fund the needs that exist to continue the same level of services elsewhere, and not raid funds.
But if the money is there, Governor, and it seems to be far in excess of what people expected it to be, their argument is why not use some of that to help with the veterans?
Help with what, I'm sorry?
The veterans, the U.S. Bank money, sorry.
Oh, you mean, I'm talking about the Stadium Reserve.
Right, from the
Well,
Stadium Reserve.
you know, I rely again on Commissioner Franz, and he says $42 million in the bank is the minimum level that should be accepted there for fiscal stability purposes. And what they're banking on is a projection. There'll be $58 million in the reserve at the end of the next biennium, next fiscal year. But that's just projected money. So he's saying let's be conservative, let's be prudent, and let's set a floor of $42 million. And assuming that when the legislature and the next governor come back next January, in actual dollars it exceeds that amount, then that would be the time to talk about whether there's some other use for it. He's also, along with me, quite impressed with the performance of the e-pull tabs. He could be glad to share with you all the news articles about all the criticism that e-pull tabs endured at the beginning, and now that they're doing so well, now they want to steal the money.
So how do you feel about that? I told you so?
Yeah, that's how I'd go for it.
The Department of Human Rights is putting in face with a $1.3 million cut, which doesn't sound big, but to them it's huge. In Commissioner Franz's letter yesterday, he said that this reflects score settling and not policy concerns. I don't know if you agree with that, but if you do, what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, it's the Department of Human Rights. You look at the clientele of the Department of Human Rights, and to me, it goes beyond score settling. It goes to a prejudice that is just abhorrent. I mean, that's the only agency singled out for that kind of cut. And there are other agencies that have done things that some legislators find objectionable. But to single out human rights, which they tried to cut the very first year, in the 2011 biennial budget, they proposed to cut by a third human rights. Again, singled out. We held that off, and we held off further cuts, and it's just... it's really immoral what they're proposing to do. They say it's because they disagree with the fact that the department is pressing some school districts for the disparity in the suspensions and expulsions between students of color and students, white students. Well, the facts support the department, and they're working constructively with school districts. They've had about 10 of them so far that have signed agreements and how they're going to change their practices. If the Department of Human Rights were not pushing Minnesota limits a little farther toward more inclusion, more equity, more justice, they wouldn't be doing their job. And that cut is just intolerable.
Did Chair Anderson have a point when she complained that the department hadn't turned over data that she'd requested?
Did we send the data the next day? What did we? She's saying there's investigatory data that could not legally be provided, others that we promised her would do, but you're going to cut an agency by a third because, because they were slow. At this stage, with everything that our agencies are being asked for. And the legislators certainly have a right to it. I don't question that at all. But let the punishment fit the crime or the offense.
With regard to the letter that Commissioner France sent yesterday, Representative Knobloch says your concerns about our budget being fiscally irresponsible bring to mind the old saying about a pot calling a kettle black. What do you say to him?
I don't know if I'm the pot or the kettle, but I think our budget's very clean. We have a surplus projected. We're not using reserve funds. We're not using gimmicks. We're using sustainable spending. We're not phasing in spending over the next 3 biennia so they don't show up at first. We're not phasing tax cuts in over the next 3 biennia so they don't show up at first. I mean, I think the contrast is marked.
Governor, the Senate tax bill, last time we were with you, you said you hadn't had a chance to take a look at it. It's on the floor today. What's your thoughts, particularly the automatic cut that would be triggered in taxes if there's a surplus?
Well, first of all, to make the bill public on one day and have a committee hearing the next day and bring it on the floor the next day when they've had the last 3 months is just terribly irresponsible and denies taxpayers, denies the public, the press, and all of us in this administration a chance to evaluate it and to comment on it and perhaps bring about changes. The average tax cut would provide an individual or a family would be between $50 and $95. The average tax cut it provides a multimillionaire with a $5 million estate is $338,000. I'll leave that comparison to anybody's good judgment. It's really shocking, and it's not entirely clear to any of us how this trigger would work. But basically, they're saying if the November forecast projects a surplus, then right away this money is taken away for tax reduction. Ahead of the budget reserve, ahead of whatever needs to develop between the November and the February budget, which is the final one we use for budgeting purposes. It's part of this whole, take money away here, take money away there. It's the Grover Norquist, we're gonna drown state government in the bathtub. We're gonna just keep reducing until it can't perform, it can't function. And you know what happened last time they ran into that, back in the late 2008 period of time, is they started borrowing money from schools. They couldn't make the cuts. It's the same thing in 2011. They couldn't make the cuts. They wouldn't tell us what the cuts were going to be because they were so drastic for so many people across the state that they just tossed numbers out, but they never came forward with where you're going to cut. At the end, $1.5 billion. You're part of the meeting in the middle. And they're going to create the same situation. They're going to create a fiscal nightmare for the next governor and legislature, which they're going to propose. They're going to say, well, once again, government spends too much money, so we're going to propose cut further, and if they follow their course, they won't decide themselves. They'll leave it to the administration to make those decisions. It's just, you can see the path as clear as the iceberg ahead of the Titanic, and this time we're ringing the alarm bell more than 30 seconds ahead of time.
Governor, the House has been hearing its individual omnibus bills and debating them on the floor, but the HF 4099 that's going to only has 4 of those divisions reflected in the bill that's going to be argued today. It's kind of looking like the rest of those are going to be put in the conference committee, and that's the first time we're going to see that entire bill. Does that disturb you?
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole thing. Just don't disclose, don't come forward. I mean, they've had 3 months to put this stuff together, and they're just denying the public and all of the press and all of our administration the chance to really evaluate. And then, when they get in the conference committee, they have to work out their differences before they sit down with me to negotiate if they're planning to do that. We'll see if they provide any more time and opportunity for everybody to look at what their product is. But when they don't want people to see what the product is, it makes me think that maybe they're not so proud of their product.
Governor, back to taxes. Do you like the House bill and Chair David's any better than the Senate at this point?
I'm going to compare the two, and I'm not going to debate one or the other because they need to work their difference out. And then I have one legislative bill, and that's the one I'll respond to in detail and negotiate around. it again gives more tax reduction for upper income people than lower income. It eliminates any reduction in the first tier, goes to the second tier. I'd say the Senate is better than the House by going to the first tier because everybody gets the benefit of it. But you still have the regressive nature of it. And, but at least they each have a bill out finally. And so they can bring those, assuming the Senate passes in the Senate, I'm sure it will, go to the conference committee, and then, as I say, we'll have a final bill that's a legislative bill, and I'll have a bill, and we can sit down and talk.
Back to the bonding bill for a moment, is there, I know you think the whole thing is woefully inadequate, but is there any one area where you think they really shorted? Was it higher education or any specific area you were disappointed in?
It came out last night. I honestly have not looked at the details of it, but if it only adds up to $875 million, that's, again, about one-third, slightly over one-third of the $2.3 billion that I said, were legitimate needs out there. So it's guaranteed to underfund and not fund projects that are really important.
Governor, why not make the structural changes to the MSFA so they're in place for the next administration?
You talking about the Stadium Authority?
The commissioner mentioned it in his letter.
I'm sorry, but...
The MSFA? Stadium Authority.
Yeah, Stadium Authority, that's what I asked. I don't think it needs structural changes right now. I think it has an excellent board. Mike Vekich is the chair. He's a CPA. He's unquestioned integrity and respect from everybody across the political spectrum. If he thought there were needs that need to be met, this is a one-person vendetta looking for something more to get publicity about. And it's, look at the reserve, the growing reserve. Look at the fiscal integrity. There had the one very serious aberration from that with the state, with these what would you call them? The sweets. I tell my young staff, just follow my advice. Don't get old. The sweets. They had an aberration there, and it was rightfully criticized. It was corrected. It doesn't occur now. So it's like, so what's your problem with what's going on? You want to revamp the whole thing? You want to change the board? You want to make the legislature, both House and Senate, confirm the appointees? You want to, do a number of other things that just aren't advised by anything that's going on there. They want to do this stuff next year after I'm gone. They want to muck around and do all this stuff. I'll be tweeting from Bolivia, and I'll keep you posted. I'll keep you posted on my opinions, which you can disregard as much as they just basically disregard them now, but not till then.
Last question.
Governor, do you have any thoughts on the Department of the Interior reinstating the twin medals? The Department of the Interior reinstating the twin medals?
Predictable. They're going to let industry run roughshod over environmental protection across the country, and we're no exception. The one possible bright spot there was that it's not clear, we're trying to find out, they're extending these leases that have already expired. They're saying that the company has, first they were saying the company has automatic renewal rights, which means they could renew their leases ad infinitum. Now they're saying they can do it 3 times, and this is the 3rd time. How long the company's going to ask for these leases to continue remains to be seen, but the notion that those properties belong to the company or rather than to the people, to me is really just misguided. But there's a question whether or not they will perform an environmental analysis before they decide whether to renew the leases that are being applied for renewal, and that would be an improvement over just handing it over to them for exploration and whatever else follows thereafter. But we'll have to see. It's not. The practices of this administration are not encouraging in any of those respects.
Governor, do you think the severe and pervasive standard change to the league, to the sexual harassment needs to happen this year, or do you think it should be vetted more fully and considered in years to come?
I give tremendous credit to Representative Pepin. She did a very courageous and very decisive and very much necessary change in statute. Severe and pervasive has been interpreted by the courts to mean it has to go on for a long time, and if it's not long enough, then it can keep on going. I mean, that's what a terrible statement that makes to people who have been wronged. It's your eyes are wide open as mine when you see what's going on in the session, when something comes forward, and then suddenly, kaboom, it gets sidetracked or railroaded or whatever. You see the influence of these special interests, and you look at who's opposing that legislation. For the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce to be opposed to strong, enforceable sexual harassment protection, I mean, I just don't think they represent Minnesota businesses. I don't think Minnesota businesses, business owners right across the state want that kind of ambiguity and want not to have their employees to have the kind of protection that Representative Pepin would provide. But, they've got their obvious, and they go out bend somebody's ear, and then they get it derailed in the Senate, which is shameful.
Governor, there's a move to take the data practices offices out of admin and into the Office of Administrative Hearings. Commissioner Franz letter said there's not any real reason for that. It's not going to create any improvements. What is the issue that you have with that, and what problem do you think it might create?
I wish the legislative branch would do the legislative branch business and let the executive branch do the executive branch business, which means functioning, means promulgating rules according to statute. It means making operating decisions. It means not having boards and commissions mucked up and switched around and rearranged. I mean, I've been through agency mergers and agency divisions, and it sets the agency back a good 2 years. There's 1 year where everybody's worried about what's going to happen and where's their desk going to be, and do they have a desk, and et cetera. There's a year then where it happens, you got to redo all the stationery and all of everything else. And then you still have, as we've seen with so many of these so-called mergers, they continue to function as separate entities. They're in separate buildings. It's just, I rarely, maybe the Department of Commerce, where they merged 4 agencies back before many of you were born. That may be the one time where I've seen improvement as a result. But it's just, the encroachment of the legislative branch into the proper functions and purview of the executive branch has concerned me. It's too late for me now to do anything. And of course, you're not going to get very much of a receptive hearing at the legislature for reining in itself or applying it to itself the same standards of disclosure and financial integrity that it requires of the executive branch. I mean, it's just so I decided not to fight that fight. I'll let somebody else take that on. But the fact is, they should appropriate money, they should make policy, and they should let the executive branch function unless there's clear indication that it's not doing so.
Okay. Take that, man.
My editorial comments for the day. Anybody would like me to elaborate on those? Make a time reservation.